afternoon everyone, and welcome back to Miss P Presents with me, Miss P. Now, last week I was looking at my top 10 novels of the 1930s, and this week we are moving on to my top 10 novels of the 1940s. So, grab yourself a cup of tea, and let's get talking. We kick this week off with not just my favourite book of the 1940s, but my favourite book of all time. I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, published in 1948. There is so much to love in this novel. It is funny, even farcical at times, but always witty and perceptive, with a lovely, quiet, melancholic tone that ripples through the story and reminds us that some of the most beautiful things in life can sometimes be sad. Things like happy memories and dreams and falling in love. The story is told from the point of view of 17-year-old Cassandra Mortmain, an aspiring writer who records everything in her diary and who loves eating 2 penny bars of nut milk chocolate in the bath. Cassandra lives with her eccentric family in a wonderful run-down castle in the middle of nowhere. Life is largely uneventful, and most of her time is spent wondering how on earth they're ever going to earn any money. Her sister Rose considers selling herself on the streets, but as their stepmother Topaz points out, she may not have much success in rural Suffolk.
Where are you going? Going to the vicarage to borrow from the poor box.
Everything changes though, when one day something extraordinary happens. The 2 American heirs to the castle, who just so happen to be good-looking young men, show up and fall under the spell of both the castle and its glorious inhabitants. The novel evokes feelings of such nostalgia. To be 17 again. Smith paints such a vivid picture of that time in our lives when we feel on the cusp of adulthood. How at such a time we often feel like things are the end of the world. And then we have a moment of realisation, of understanding that it's okay, that it will pass, and we will get through it. I love it so much. Next up we have Marianna by Monica Dickens, published in 1940. Another coming-of-age story, this time telling of the adventures of young Mary as she searches for love and life. It offers a beautifully detailed insight into what it was like to be a certain sort of girl in the 1930s. It does feel very much of its time, but in a charming way that will often make you laugh out loud. It has aged well, as I would say that all of Mary's concerns, who you fancy, what's going on at school, where's good to go out at the weekend, how much freedom you'll have once you become an adult, etc., etc., were my concerns exactly. It's the world of a teenage girl and is so convincing and so all-consuming that for the time that you're reading it, it'll be the only existence you know. Next up we have the Slaves of Solitude by Patrick Hamilton, published in 1947. It tells the story of 39-year-old Miss Roach, who resides in a boarding house called the Rosamond Tea Rooms after being bombed out of London during the Second World War. Miss Roach is a fascinating and extremely engaging narrator, whose outlook on life will have you chuckling one moment and feeling great sadness the next. And it is sad. All of the residents of the boarding house are solitary, sitting down to dinner each night at their own individual tables with soup, spam and pudding. Most eat in silence and are forced to endure the idiotic, offensive remarks of fellow boarder Thwaites, the president in hell, who, as Roach notes, is unlikely to ever die due to his irritatingly good health. It's so beautifully, unsentimentally written. I absolutely love it, and I'm sure you will too. Next up on the list we have The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford, published in 1945. This novel is totally joyous. The Radletts are an outrageously unconventional, aristocratic family occupying their own bubble of eccentricity at their great estate of Alconley. Time is spent indulging their strange behaviours. Uncle Matthew periodically uses bloodhounds to hunt his children across the countryside and insists that his female children remain uneducated. Our narrator Fanny is cousin to the wildest and most life-loving of Uncle Matthew's children, Linda. Together Fanny and Linda dream of escape, longing to grow up so that they can meet men, get married, and have sex.
It's not sexual. It's a meeting of minds.
The two complement each other well. Linda is high drama and prone to sudden mood swings, whereas Fanny is more reserved. Bearing witness to their adventures as they reach their maturity is such a pleasure. Both are so different, yet both are so gorgeously full of life, of hope, and full of feeling. This is tepid. Joffrey! Joffrey! It's disgusting. It just shouldn't get to the point where I taste it, Joffrey. You should anticipate these things beforehand. I'm not upset, I just thought you would know better than to do this. How many times now, Joffrey? You should be paying attention. Tepid, not warm, it was... Wait there. Much better. Next up, we have The Body in the Library by Agatha Christie, published in 1942. The Body in the Library. Oh, it's so good. I remember being absolutely blown away by the plot the first time I read it, and despite knowing what's going to happen, still find it so gripping to reread.
Now that is interesting.
Miss Marple is the delightfully shrewd amateur detective who is able to decipher crimes by drawing parallels between them and people or scenarios she has known before in the supposedly quiet village of St Mary Mead, where she lives. In The Body in the Library, Miss Marple is called to assist her friends the Bantries after they wake one morning to discover the body of a young woman lying dead in their library. Next up we have Because of the Lockwoods by Dorothy Whipple, published in 1949. Now, before we say anything about this book, let's just take a moment to appreciate the title. So good. It tells the story of two neighbouring families, the wealthy, well-to-do Lockwoods and the poor, fatherless Hunters. Structurally, it's very interesting. Certain scenes seem so vivid, almost cinematic. You can imagine a camera panning across a landscape or focusing in on a character's particular expression. There is an Austen-like feel to some of Whipple's characters, like the awful, patronising Mrs. Lockwood, whose snobbery is on par with Mrs. John Dashwood from Sense and Sensibility.
Oh, a cottage! How charming. A little cottage is always very snug.
It also has the most satisfying, unexpected ending. It's a novel about judgment, about families and finding a place for ourselves apart from them. I absolutely love it. Next up on the list we have Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, published in 1945. Brideshead Revisited is a beautiful novel about nostalgia, social class, religion, duty, desire and hope. It tells the story of Charles Ryder, a history student who becomes infatuated with fellow undergraduate Sebastian Flight and his aristocratic family. Sebastian is good company, charming, exuberant, and yet often whimsically childish. Despite his apparent zest for life, Sebastian is profoundly unhappy and turns to drink as a means of numbing the pain. The impressionable Charles is further beguiled by Sebastian's sister Julia, who is conflicted between her desire to marry well and her strong Catholic faith. The novel reflects on the golden age of the interwar period, with Charles pining for a childhood that he never had, and searching for a love that will endure. Next up on the list we have The Mating Season by P.G. Wodehouse. I am a huge fan of the Jeeves and Wooster series and have included this one, The Mating Season, published in 1949 to represent the entire collection, of which it could be argued every one deserves a place in my top 100. The stories follow Bertie Wooster, an idle but affable gentleman with a propensity for getting into awful scrapes. The task of extricating young Worcester from these situations falls to his manservant Jeeves, a valet of extraordinary competence, sophistication, and style. Oh, Joffrey, don't look at me like that. Joffrey! This particular story involves rather a lot of confusion. Expect lovers' tiffs, mistaken identity, and more than the usual number of aunts. As with all the Jeeves and Worcester novels, it's absolutely hilarious. It's charming, it's silly, and it's guaranteed to make you smile.
Yes, quite. Good, eh?
Next up on the list we have Gigi and the Cat, which are two novellas by Colette, published in 1944 with English translations in 1949. Both are superbly sumptuous stories which follow the upbringing of Parisian Gigi, who is being educated to become a courtesan. The dialogue is divine, and Gigi is a delightful character. Suspicious and bored by her tutors, she rebels against expectation and decides to follow her own mind. The writing really is so good, and Colette is such a fascinating writer, artist, and person. If you don't know anything about her, I really do urge you to look her up. Decided to come back, did you? Joffrey, Oh yes, very good, make a fresh one. Fresh! Next up we have The Far Cry by Emma Smith, published in 1949. It tells the story of 14-year-old Teresa, who is dragged off to India by her willful father in order to spite his ex-wife, who he believes has arrived back in his life to claim custody of their daughter. Smith writes with such grace about the experience of a young girl feeling out of place, the awkwardness of being a teenager and not yet knowing yourself. The descriptions are vivid, the observations perceptive. It's a lovely book that speaks of freedom, adventure, and heartache. Oh, Joffrey, you shouldn't have. Really, it was all forgotten. You're sweet. That was Miss P's Top 10 Novels of the 1940s. Join me next week when I'll be discussing my top 10 novels of the 1950s. Can't wait to see you there. Joffrey, are these from the guest bathroom? Ugh, take them away. They need a bit more water. Thank you so much for watching my channel. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe so you can keep up to date with all things Miss P presents. See you next time.